what happened in 1994 with the conservative revolution that took the Democrats out of power in Congress and put the Republicans in. And many of you can remember that. I was very involved in the Joe Scarborough campaign back in those days, and I'm very familiar with those great candidates that went up to Washington, Scarborough, and Helen Chenoweth from over here in Idaho, and others like Bob Barr and several others, Steve Largent and so forth. But what happened was, as soon as they got to Washington, D.C., the Newt Gingriches of our country squashed that independent conservative spirit that those freshmen brought into Washington, D.C., and the Republican establishment in Washington, D.C. took over that movement, and by the end of 1995, the conservative revolution was kaput. And if we are not careful, those of us that can call ourselves in one way or another a part of the Tea Party movement, if we are not careful, and we allow this movement of freedom and independence to be overtaken by the establishment, status quo, politicians in both parties, this movement in 2010 will not live past Election Day this November. The only way that we can keep this momentum going is twofold. Number one, we must stop, cease, and desist forevermore voting for the lesser of two evils. Ladies and gentlemen, whether you're going over the cliff at 50 miles an hour or 60 miles an hour, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. You're still going over the cliff. And for a fellow who comes along to say, vote for me because I'm not quite as bad as the fellow over here, or vote for this party because we're not quite as bad as that party over there, and the American people have been swallowing that for many, many decades, that has to stop. We must put men and women in public office who believe, who will protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, so help them God. As a Christian pastor, I often have people come to me and say, and they're very sincere people, and I'm not trying to demean them in any shape, manner, or form. They come to me and they'll say, Chuck, what we have to do is we have to elect more Christians to public office. Okay. Have you ever known anyone running for public office who wasn't a Christian? Especially every 2 years. When's the last time you heard somebody say, vote for me, I'm an atheist. Vote for me, I don't believe in God. They all claim to be Christians. They all claim to go to church. Ladies and gentlemen, when that public office holder takes the oath of office, county, state, national, they raise one hand to heaven with another hand on a Bible and take an oath between God and the people that elected them. And they swear one thing. They do not promise to be a good Republican. They do not promise to be a good Democrat. They do not promise to be a good conservative or a good liberal. And they do not promise to be a good Christian. They promise God and us that they will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, and it's time that you and me start making sure that they obey their oath of office. When I hire a plumber to come and fix my toilets, I'm not really interested in whether or not he claims to be a Christian. I want to know, does he know how to make my plumbing work? Now, as a minister, I have a desire for his soul, and if he wants me to talk with him one-on-one and gives me the opportunity to share with him faith, I will be more than happy to do that. But when I bring him to my house and I sign a contract with him, and I put my name on the dotted line, and I vow that I will fulfill my end of the contract, which is to pay him whatever the job calls for, then when he leaves my property, I expect that he will fulfill his part of the contract is my plumbing will work when he leaves my property. We sign a contract. We mutually pledge ourselves to a contract. He expects me to pay him, and I expect him to fix my plumbing. Ladies and gentlemen, whenever we elect someone to public office, we are entering into a contract with them. It is a two-way contract. And their responsibility is to fulfill their oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And it really shouldn't matter whether it's a liberal or a conservative, whether it is a Democrat or Republican or independent or libertarian or Constitution Party. Every single office holder is obligated to do one thing, and that is to fulfill their oath of office to the Constitution. And I want to tell you, my friends, if they were doing what they promised to do, we would not be in the mess we're in today. Amen. Regardless of where they go to church or what they call themselves. And so it is obligatory upon us that we hold them accountable to the Constitution. The second thing we must do is we must recognize that when those 13 sovereign independent states created this entity that we know as the federal government in Washington, D.C., those states did not cede their authority, autonomy, and freedom to that federal government. They were states before the federal government came into existence, and they were independent sovereign states after the federal government came into existence, and they are still independent sovereign states today. The 10th Amendment is very clear about the line of delineation between the federal government and the state governments. It is very clear that those powers that are not specifically enumerated to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people respectively. I think you and I both know that the vast majority of money and dictation that emanates out of Washington, D.C. today is in defiance of the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And that we are supporting directly that which is contrary to the principles of limited government as defined in the Constitution, especially as to the 10th Amendment. The result is we have a Leviathan, a monstrosity in Washington, D.C. that is literally choking the lifeblood out of our states and out of our people. And if we are going to resurrect freedom in America, let me tell you, and I don't mean to, I'm not trying to be critical of a cliche. There's nothing wrong with this cliche. I'm sure I've used it myself many times. Take back America. Let me tell you, my friends, we are not going to take back America until we take back our sovereign states.